Well, and you shouldn't leave out women pirates because there were actually women pirates as well.
That is true. I mean, usually we think of pirates as being a boys' club kind of mentality. Always you hear about the male pirates. You hear about, most notably, of course, Blackbeard. But there are women pirates. There's Anne Bonny, who is probably the most famous of all the female pirates. And her exploits, she was certainly about as tough as anyone could get when it came to being a pirate.
That is true, but the thing that's really interesting about Anne Bonny is she came from a very good family. She was born into wealth, and she ran away from home. She hooks up with this pirate named Jack Rackham and starts sailing with him. She dresses as a man um, and fights on the deck with a cutlass and a pistol. Uh, Finally, off Jamaica, the entire crew is hung over from a drinking binge the night before, except for Anne, and up pops a British man of war. The crew all runs below and hides except for Anne, but notwithstanding her resistance, they take them prisoner. They hang them all except for Anne, and she claimed her belly. She was pregnant, so they didn't hang her. They were going to wait until after she had the baby, but here she vanishes from history. And a lot of people think that her rich father came down, bailed her out, and that she and the baby then returned to a life of respectability, drinking tea and eating biscuits.
Well, that's an interesting story about Anne Bonny. However, also interesting is that one of the books up here, Blackbeard and Other Pirates, actually talks about that story and that Anne Bonny on the ship with Rackham was not the only female pirate. Talk about a woman by the name of Mary Roberts, I believe it is, who was basically raised as a boy for her entire life. She dressed as a boy. She was seen as a houseboy and a house servant. She learned how to fight like a man. And when Anne discovered this second woman on board, Rackham became jealous because he thought Anne was having an affair. But when he discovers that there's a second woman on board, it's all of a sudden, oh, not only do I have one female pirate, I have two. And so when a ship gets taken, I mean, just imagine the bruised ego of a captain when he finds out he has to surrender to a woman of all people. I mean, not to sound sexist, but in a time where women are traditionally seen as being always at home and never going out into adventurous lifestyle, this is something that would just stun society as a whole. And the belly story as well, where both women plead that they're pregnant, is something that comes up. And off and on, they're always going to be executed. But Mary Roberts disappears from history, and Anne Bonny, certainly the speculation that she ends up going back to her family and ends up living in, well, I believe it'd be South Carolina she ends up in, from what I recall. And she ends up just raising a family and has to keep her wild tendencies buried down.
But you know, you talk about capturing these ships, and I think what most people don't realize about pirate battle tactics is they were really just interested in having the ships they were attacking surrender as quickly as possible.
Oh, yes.
That's one of the reasons they ran up the black flag. It's like, if you resist, there will be no quarter. They were trying to scare people into surrendering right away. They weren't too subtle. They were in small ships with narrow drafts so that they could sneak into shallow water, into coves and inlets. They really weren't interested in engaging in battle if they didn't have to. And when they did board, their tactics weren't very subtle either. Whereas a European gentleman or soldier might have his rapier and try to run you through, a pirate would get there with a cutlass, and he was just interested in hacking. And he usually went for your legs. He wanted to disable you, get you out of the fight as quick as possible. Nothing honorable here. Just take care of business.
Oh, certainly that is very true. But pirate tactics alone, I mean, these aren't stupid men. I mean, let's face it. Usually a merchant ship would know if there's a pirate vessel hunting them because crews on a number of ships might only number maybe a dozen men. But if you find a ship overloading with men, traditionally they would always declare this, oh, that must be a pirate ship, now let's get out of here. But when the pirates would board, certainly you'd have the black flag go up, the skull and crossbones, and some pirates would change their flags. Blackbeard had a devil with a pierced heart as his flag. And the scare tactic alone would, of course, be there. In fact, Speaking of Blackbeard, here's a man who used pirate tactics when it came to theatrics. I mean, this is a man who would tie filaments into his hair and his beard and set them on fire. And imagine Blackbeard boarding your ship in the middle of the night, about to take it, and all of a sudden you see this man with a fiery glow around his face. I mean, people believed the devil himself was coming to attack him. And on top of that, he was about as armed to the teeth as you could get. Cutlasses around his waist, bandoliers of pistols across his chest. I mean, this is a man who was ready to fight and kill you. And so just the sheer image of this pirate scares people. And literally, I mean, it's just all about theater and dramatics. How can you awe your enemy? It's a shock and awe treatment, basically.
And, you know, when they attack cities, once again, their terrible reputations preceded them. In many cases, the only people defending these, especially Spanish colonial cities, were local militias. And 9 times out of 10, they were more interested in taking off in the mountains than standing firm against the pirates. Usually the defense of a city would consist of a couple of volleys, and then they take off. Because, as I said, if you got the pirates mad by resisting, they were very apt to slaughter everybody that they could get their hands on.
And that's true. And just imagine living in a town. Of course, if a pirate decides to retire in your town, the reputation of that pirate alone, just imagine you have his ship and you have his crew and he has that fierceness, could almost become your own protection in a way, because it's, go ahead, I dare you to attack us. We've got this pirate who's known for sinking your ship after he's got your surrender just because. I mean, it's a mentality like that. You can use their own success to go ahead and protect you. Now, a successful pirate, when we think about them, always comes down to how much treasure they get. And so, is there really buried treasure out there? I mean, do you think there is? We always hear legends of it.
Well, I think we ought to talk about some of the most successful pirates. You know, I mentioned Drake. He certainly accumulated a lot of treasure. He turned that into Queen Elizabeth. Henry Morgan, called the Pirate King, sacked the city of Panama. He had 10 ships and 2,000 men. Very successful pirate. Are there really buried treasures? Well, a lot of pirates, especially the ones that you don't hear about, the ones who aren't the Drakes, just your run-of-the-mill pirates, they'd spend what they got as quickly as they could. You know, they'd go and drink and wench and do all those pirate things.
A nice time at Tortuga.
Yeah. But on the other hand, these are guys who could die at any time.
Mm-hmm.
So if they wanted to sock anything away before they went into battle, they could very well decide, I'm going to hide it on Tortuga or near a place we often come to. And so there are small treasures that have been found. One of the greatest treasures that's been found occurred in the 1980s. It was called the Ouida, and it was the pirate ship of Captain Bellamy. And it sank in a storm 1,500 feet off the Cape Cod beaches in 25 feet of water. And treasure hunter Barry Clifford found this in the mid-'80s. It's worth $400 million, which will give you some idea of the wealth that they could be carrying. He didn't have time to spend it, and he didn't have time to bury it.
Well, certainly not. Now, when we think about buried treasure, you know, every story that comes out, I mean, you have Pirates of the Caribbean, of course you think about that. And a good example of where a child's imagination really comes into play is from the 1980s in the movie The Goonies, where they think about buried treasure and the kids just call it rich stuff, and they just have this idea in their minds about what it could be, and lo and behold, they find the treasure of the pirate One-Eyed Willie. But what would a traditional pirate loot look like?
Well, pieces of 8 doubloons, the Spanish gold doubloon, which is this little item here. And of course, the piece of 8 was silver. And the Goonies aren't so far off, because there are actually a couple of treasure islands that treasure hunters are still going to.